You were the smart one. Everyone knew it, your teachers said it, your parents repeated it at dinner tables and family gatherings like it was the most certain thing in the world. And somewhere along the way, you started to believe it too, not arrogantly, just quietly, as a kind of private certainty, a foundation you built your identity on. So here's what nobody prepared you for. What if that certainty, that one thing you've always had, is the very reason your life hasn't moved? Think about the people you grew up with, the ones who struggled in school, who had to read chapters twice, study all weekend, ask for help they were embarrassed to ask for. You probably didn't think much about them back then. Look at them now. Some of them have built businesses from nothing. They're disciplined, consistent, and moving, not because they're brilliant, but because they learned something early that you never had to. Meanwhile, you feel stuck. Not lazy stuck, not uninspired stuck, something stranger and more suffocating than that. You feel like a high-performance engine sealed inside a car that won't start. You rev it, you hear the power, but nothing moves. You are, by almost any measure, the smartest person in many rooms you walk into, and you are making the least amount of visible progress. That's not just frustrating, it's destabilizing, because your whole life, intelligence was supposed to be the answer, the shortcut, the guarantee. So why isn't it working? Here is the truth that almost no one talks about, and it's a hard one to sit with. Your intelligence isn't just failing to guarantee your success. In several very specific and very measurable psychological ways, it might be actively working against it. You are not failing in spite of how smart you are. You may be failing because of it. Let's go back to childhood. When things came easily, the feedback you received wasn't "you worked hard." It was "you're so smart." That sounds like a compliment. It is, in fact, a trap. Because what it taught you slowly, invisibly, over years, was that your value comes from being smart, not from getting better. Intelligence became an identity, not a practice, and identities are fragile things. Think about what happens in your body when you sit in a meeting and someone asks a question you don't have a perfect answer to. Most people just speak. They think aloud, get corrected, adjust, and move on, but you go quiet. Because to you, not knowing the answer isn't a neutral moment. It's a threat. It means the smart thing, the one thing you've always been, might not be true today. So you stay silent, you protect the reputation. The guy next to you throws out a half-baked idea, gets challenged, refines it on the spot, and walks out of the room with the credit. He played the game. You were trying to protect your score. Psychologists call this a fixed mindset, the deep, often unconscious belief that intelligence is a fixed quantity you either have or you don't, not a muscle, a lamp, on or off. And here is the devastating consequence of that belief. The moment something requires real effort, it doesn't feel like learning. It feels like evidence that the talent is leaving. Confusion stops being a natural part of growth. It becomes a personal failure. Struggle stops being the path. It becomes a sign you're on the wrong one. So what do? You retreat. You abandon the project before it gets too hard. You don't apply for the thing. You tell yourself you weren't really trying, because if you weren't really trying, then you didn't really fail. That's not procrastination. That's identity protection. Here's the bitter irony. Your friends who struggled in school, they were forced into something you were never asked to do. They had to sit inside confusion day after day and survive it. They learned the hard way that feeling lost is just the beginning of learning something new. That discomfort is not a stop sign. It's the first mile of the road. That lesson, earned through genuine difficulty, became their superpower, and you never needed to earn it, so you never got it. Here is where it gets even more specific. Your brain is genuinely powerful. When you encounter a problem, you don't just see the surface. You see the layers beneath it, the second-order consequences, the risks that haven't materialized yet, the 17 ways something could go wrong. That's an extraordinary capacity, in theory. In practice, it means that when you want to start something, a business, a creative project, a new career, you don't just think about the idea. You map the entire territory before you take a single step. Product, marketing, funding, competition, legal exposure. What happens if the economy shifts? What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if it does work and you can't scale it? You've thought about more failure scenarios than most people will encounter in a lifetime, and you've used that thinking to justify not starting. Picture a chess grandmaster who can see 8 moves ahead. That's a real advantage. But if they never move a piece, because every opening carries some theoretical risk, because the perfect sequence hasn't revealed itself yet, they lose on time. The clock doesn't care how far ahead you can see, it only cares whether you moved. You are losing on time. The people accelerating past you right now are not in many cases more capable than you. They're just less informed about the risks. They didn't see the cliff, so they walked forward. They made a mistake on move 3, corrected it, made another mistake, corrected that, and now they're 20 moves in while you're still studying the board. This is the cruelty of overintelligence. It creates the feeling of productive thinking while producing almost no real-world output. You research, you organize, you open tabs, you build frameworks and color-coded documents and 10-year plans with carefully considered contingencies. It feels like work. Your brain is fully engaged, but nothing is being made. No product exists. No relationship is being built. No skill is being practiced. And here is the question you almost never ask yourself. What is the cost of not moving? You calculate the cost of failure constantly, the embarrassment, the wasted money, the public stumble, but you rarely add up what standing still for 1 year costs you, or 5, or 10. Someone out there right now is selling their first product, one they named in 5 minutes, with a logo they made in an afternoon, on a website they're embarrassed about, and it's working, not because it's perfect, because it exists. A powerful engine is useless without a driver willing to pull out of the driveway. There's a third trap, and this one is perhaps the most seductive. Your mind is fast, which means it needs feeding. New problems, new systems, new frameworks, these light you up in a way that repetitive work simply doesn't. And so there's a pattern, quietly playing out across your life, that you may not have named yet. You start things brilliantly. The new language, the fitness routine, the side project, the course, the beginning is electric. You're learning the architecture of something. You're figuring out how the pieces connect. Your brain is doing what it does best, absorbing, synthesizing, making sense of a new world. And then it stops being new. The grammar of the language gets tedious. The gym routine becomes mechanical. The business requires the same outreach email for the 40th time. The exciting problem has been solved. Now there's just the slow, unglamorous work of building on top of it. This is the moment you live. Not dramatically, just quietly. You drift. You tell yourself, I understand the concept now. I could do this if I wanted to. And you move on to the next interesting thing, carrying the credential of someone who could without ever becoming someone who did. The psychologist Robert Vallerand calls this a problematic passion, when the excitement of beginning becomes more important than the discipline of continuing. But here's what the most successful people understand that you haven't fully accepted yet: mastery lives on the other side of boredom. The difference between falling in love and staying married isn't chemistry. It's commitment to showing up on the days it isn't exciting. The dishes, the difficult conversations, the ordinary Tuesday. Anyone can fall in love. Very few people build something that lasts. You are in love with beginnings. You are allergic to the middle. And the middle is where everything real is made. You have a graveyard of half-finished projects. Each headstone marks a moment you got bored and called it growth. You have a vast, impressive library of partial knowledge, a little of everything, mastery of almost nothing. And the cruelest part, each abandoned project made the next abandonment slightly easier. You trained yourself to quit, and you called it being smart. So here's where that leads. Not to one catastrophic failure. Smart people rarely have those. They're too good at avoiding obvious disasters. Instead, it leads to a slow, accumulating drift, a life that looks fine from the outside, reasonably successful, reasonably together, but internally, a persistent, low-grade awareness that none of it is close to what you're actually capable of. The psychologist Abraham Maslow called it the most painful of human experiences, sensing your own potential clearly and watching it go unrealized. You know what you could build, you can see it with unusual precision, and that vision, that picture of what could be, sits in your chest like something unfinished, not as motivation, as weight. Because the gap between what you can imagine and what you have actually made isn't just frustrating. Over time, it becomes its own kind of identity. I'm the person who almost, the person who could in theory, the person who is going to eventually. The world doesn't reward potential, it rewards output. It rewards the thing that got made, however imperfect, however risky, however incomplete. Here is what changes everything. You don't need to become less intelligent. You don't need to somehow lower your standards, or stop seeing the risks, or pretend that complexity doesn't exist. You need to redirect your intelligence, point it at a different problem. Right now, your intelligence is mostly pointed inward, protecting your identity, mapping risks, searching for the perfect path, evaluating ideas before they touch the real world. What you need to do is turn it outward, toward building something real, however messy, toward extracting feedback from actual results, not theoretical ones, toward the uncomfortable, awkward, imperfect act of doing. The goal shifts from being smart to getting better. That is not a small shift. For someone whose entire sense of self has been built on a particular kind of effortless intelligence, it can feel like a kind of death. But on the other side of that death is the only version of yourself that actually builds anything. The first thing you need to do is give yourself explicit permission to be bad. Not as a failure state to escape quickly, as a deliberate choice, a strategy. When you begin the next project, say it out loud if you need to. I am going to do this poorly. Not as an excuse, as a liberation. You are severing, temporarily and intentionally, the connection between your performance and your worth. Your goal is no longer to demonstrate intelligence. Your goal is to gather real information from the real world as fast as possible. Think about learning to ride a bike. You wobbled, you fell, you probably looked genuinely ridiculous, and you got back on not because you were a prodigy, but because the goal was clear and the method was obvious. Fall, get up, adjust. That's the entire method, and it works exactly the same way at 28 or 35 or 41. The fool phase isn't weakness, it's the only honest starting point. And for someone with your mind, once you start gathering real feedback, your intelligence becomes genuinely useful, not as a barrier, but as an accelerant. Solution 2. Make action structurally easier than inaction. Here is the practical counterweight to analysis paralysis. Compress the loop. The question isn't how do I make a better plan. The question is, how fast can I get from an idea in my head to a result in the real world? That gap, the distance between thinking and doing, is where your potential disappears. You need to shorten it aggressively. Write the worst first draft, record a terrible video, build an ugly prototype, launch with a name you'll probably change. The goal is not to be good. The goal is to generate real feedback, information that only exists once something is out in the world. Here's a clear illustration. Two people want to get in shape. The first spends 6 weeks researching optimal training protocols, periodization models, and nutritional timing. The second walks into the gym on Monday, does what feels right, gets sore, adjusts, comes back Wednesday. 6 months later, the second person has a body. The first has an excellent research document. You cannot steer a parked car. The steering only works once you're moving. Set the bar for starting so low it becomes impossible to avoid. Not, I will work on my business for 2 hours, but I will write 1 sentence of the business plan. Not, I will go to the gym, but I will put on my shoes. Motion generates feedback. Feedback generates learning. Learning, finally, generates something worth being intelligent about. Solution 3. Starve the novelty loop. The third solution is the most demanding one, and it requires you to recognize something uncomfortable in real time. That feeling, the one that arrives about 3 weeks into a project, when the initial excitement has faded and the work is becoming repetitive, that feeling is not a signal that you've chosen the wrong path. It's not boredom telling you to leave. It is the exact moment that separates the people who build things from the people who don't. Stay. That's the entire instruction. When the itch comes, the pull toward something new, the whisper that says, I understand this now, I could move on, recognize it for what it is, a test, not a revelation. Make a rule and enforce it without negotiation. You are not allowed to start anything new until the current project reaches a meaningful milestone, not completion necessarily, but a real, tangible output that didn't exist before you began. This trains something in your brain that might be genuinely new for you, the capacity to value finishing over starting, to experience the specific, deeper satisfaction of something completed rather than something begun. Because here's what's on the other side of the boring part, not just the finished project, not just the skill, the knowledge, real, embodied knowledge, not theoretical, that you can stay, that you can work when it's hard, that your intelligence didn't disappear when the easy part ended. That knowledge changes your relationship to yourself, and that changes everything else. The world is full of brilliant people who are waiting. Waiting to feel ready, waiting for the right moment, waiting for a plan without holes in it, waiting for someone to recognize what they already know about themselves. That wait has a cost, and the cost compounds every year. Your intelligence is not a trophy. It was never meant to be displayed, protected, or kept clean. It's a tool, a remarkably powerful one, and tools exist for one purpose: to build things, real things, imperfect things, things that get used and wear down and have to be repaired and put back to work. You have been treating your greatest asset like something too valuable to risk, but potential that is never risked is potential that is never realized. The most complete waste of intelligence is not stupidity. It's caution. So here's where this ends, not with a plan, not with a framework, not with 10 steps to optimize your morning routine, with something simpler and harder than any of that. Go make something today, something small, something rough, something that might not work. Let it be imperfect, let it be public, let it be real. Because the life you can see so clearly from here, the one your intelligence has always promised you, it doesn't get built by someone who was ready. It gets built by someone who started.